Welcome back to Old School Sports and our Out of the Park Baseball 24 playthrough of the Cincinnati Reds. The Reds just finished a relatively successful 89-73 regular season, although unfortunately we lost the NLDS in 5 games. And we're largely going to be bringing back the same team next year. We've gone through the arbitration period already, moved on from a few players, made a trade or two to bring some new talent on the team, and most importantly, got most all of the arbitration eligible players that we wanted to bring back signed before they had to go to arbitration. So there's not any obvious holes on the team that we want to fill as free agency begins. But I think we're still going to be busy, at least at the start of this free agency period. You can see we've got a little bit of money to spend right now, but that's really only because we've once again pared our scouting and development budgets down to minimal amounts that we don't want to go into next season with. Our two highest paid players right now by far are Corbin Burnes and Aaron Nola, although Nick Lodolo in his final arbitration eligible year next year probably going to be more expensive than Nola. But Nola, who had a respectable year for us this past season after missing his first season with us completely due to injuries, is going to be turning 33 the middle of next year. And when we look at his pitching ratings at this point, and more importantly, his performance over the full season with us this year back from the injury that cost him all of 2024, it's hard for me to see him delivering an average of $20 million of value to us for the next 4 to 5 seasons. Unfortunately for us, to be able to get him to sign with us, we had to give him a no-trade clause. But he's now in a situation where he would consider a trade to a few teams. One struggle that we do have, though, is that here, a little over 3 years into the game, the financial situation for a lot of teams is not great. There are some teams that are minus 40, minus 50, minus $60 million in relation to their budget. And I don't mean the minus meaning they're under budget. I mean the minus meaning they're running huge in the red and way over budget. But if we could get a deal for one of these teams to take most of his salary off our books, that would open up here as free agency is about to begin the opportunity to potentially try to bring Zach Gallen on board, whose pitching profile is not all that dissimilar from Nola's at this point. Gallen honestly has a little better stuff and a little better movement, but less control. And I think Nola's arsenal is a little more impressive, although Gallen does have 5 pitches. But Gallen is looking for about $7 million less than what we're going to average paying Nola for the next few years. We will take a hit to fan interest losing Nola, and Gallen isn't as strong in the clubhouse as Nola is. But that said, when we take a look at our team chemistry, we're not in a bad place. Chemistry and cohesion is almost to the maximum. Got a couple of captain personalities with Stevenson and Kelnick, who are both going to be back next year. No real negative personalities. So I think we could handle potentially bringing Gallen on board if he can save us $7 million a year. So the first thing we've got to figure out is whether one of those teams that Nola would be willing to consider a trade to are willing to make an offer for him. And nobody offers anything if we keep none of his contract. If we up it to keeping half of it, which obviously we won't do, that would kind of defeat the purpose. There's a lot of options out there now. I don't know that any of these options are really good. They look like they're all players on pretty bad contracts or pretty big contracts. I guess they're probably not all bad contracts, but wow. Alejandro Kirk, the catcher for the Toronto Blue Jays, making some insane money. Now, he certainly looks like an incredible bat for a catcher, above average defensively, but 44 and 58 million the next 2 years before he can opt out of a contract that would pay him 165 million over 3 years. This probably explains to you why there's teams that are in difficult financial situation, and I do think honestly, I want to say from when I look through this, I think the Blue Jays may be one of them. Yeah, the Blue Jays minus almost $47 million in terms of their money available. And that's what happens when you sign Vlad Guerrero Jr. to over $50 million a year, which is admittedly more palatable than paying Alejandro Kirk even more than that per season. But that's going to definitely leave a mark on your budget. But back to the issue at hand, we don't want to keep 50% of his contract. If we knock it down to 20%, is there anyone to talk to? And there are options. Now it's 3 brutal contracts: Giancarlo Stanton, Jacob deGrom, and Jose Barrios. So probably going to actually go back. Let's see if we can see who we saw when we had the 50%. We're going to see if we can start piecing something together for someone who's not making a ton of money, which obviously severely limits our options. Looks like the only possibility there really of someone where we wouldn't be taking a lot back is second baseman J.T. Riddle of the Giants, who we would likely just want to cut. But it's a start, and I want to say that I think the Giants are one of the teams that actually does have some money. Yes, the Giants have a ton of money available, so they are one of the few teams that we could potentially trade Nola to. And unfortunately, the list here is cut off. I would assume that if San Francisco is showing up, that would mean that they're on this list after San Diego. So that may be something for us to think about. See if we can get this number way lower in terms of what we retain. But we're obviously going to have to add in a real big prospect to likely get them to take the salary off of our books. But I think it may still be the right decision for us. All right, we've got an offer together to present to San Francisco that I don't think they're going to go for. We're down to keeping none of Nola's contract for Riddle in return. We have to include George Walkow, who you may remember we picked in the 5th round of our first draft. He's never made it out of rookie ball, and he's never hit off of the interstate in rookie ball. But he still isn't even 20 years old at this point. He was a pretty young prospect when we picked him up. And if he fully develops, which is obviously uncertain, looks like he could be a useful major league hitter. And then we're also throwing in the number 43 prospect in baseball, Carlos Jorge, shortstop who split this past season between A ball and high A ball. Did hit 28 home runs across the 2 levels, but hit 245 and 239. Certainly profiles as someone who could have a really nice major league bat. His glove is not incredible, And with the fact that at this point we've got the young shortstop Arroyo, we've got the young second baseman Marte, we've got the young first baseman Ellie De La Cruz, we potentially got Encarnacion Strand at third base, and then we've also got one of our top prospects, an even higher rated prospect than Carlos Jorge in Braylon Minier, who's close to making the majors and slightly better defensively with a better error rating. Feel like we can include Jorge in the deal as a potential sweetener to get them to take Nola off our hands. Even so, I don't know that this will get it done. Our assistant GM doesn't think that it will. But my goal is to not retain much of Nola's contract. I mean, it seems like if we just add up to 5% of retaining Nola's contract, it moves us up to a whole different level with what our assistant GM thinks of it. So I guess I'll submit it looking like that. Probably prepare to be laughed at, but if we can get Nola's contract off of our books, it's going to put us in a much better position financially. And it also, with the potential to bring on board Gallen, will make us just as good a team, most likely, if not arguably a slightly better team. They didn't say no way right away. I guess that's one positive thing. So while we're hoping that maybe we can get the guy who was supposed to be a cornerstone of our pitching staff less than 2 years ago off of the books, we'll also visit with Mr. Gallen. I think he's the best prospect for us. We want someone in Great American Ballpark with at least above average movement on their pitches. Dylan Cease fits the same profile, but he was looking for more money and a longer contract than Gallen was, at least the last I looked. Yeah, 9 years at $14 million a year for Dylan Cease. I think I'd rather keep things short with Gallen, who is looking for 3 years at just over $13 million a year. Brian Abreu has got the best movement on his pitches of any potential starters, but only 35 stamina. And his third pitch is only average. I know at least one of you out there would suggest that I go for him despite the low stamina. But the lack of stamina, the lack of control, and the third pitch being average make me not want to go the bargain basement route with Abreu. And then Arturo Uribe is coming over from Cuba this year. Interesting prospect. We're trying to scout him. We're 3 weeks away from knowing exactly what he is, but he's looking for about $3.5 million a year more than Gallen. And we also don't know as much about him. So I think we're going to get an offer out to Zach Gallen to at least get the conversation going with him. And I actually don't want to mess around too much. Clearly want to get the best price possible. He's looking for 13.2. We'll try to get him for 13. See if we can get some of those potentially costly bonuses off. Although if he wins a Cy Young Award for us, heck, we'll give him the $1 million. Try to cut things back a little bit more. So our average is now 12.8. He was looking for 13.2. I'd love to just get this deal signed before he's on the market too long and has a lot of other offers potentially going his way. Because if we get into a bidding war, he could become a $15, $16, $18 million player, in which case we get to a point where it might not make sense to get rid of assets to get Nola off the books. So he's willing to at least think about the offer. So we'll get the offer out to Gallen. And we will find out, hopefully shortly, what the Giants, who are one of the few teams with big money to spend, think of our offer. And the good news is we're actually close with the Giants to be able to get Nola off the books and only retain 5% of his contract. We're only one player away. Now, the issue is that player is Bryce Hubbard, one of the better starting prospects in our organization, but not a guy that I don't think we can live without, or that I think, yeah. Edwin Arroyo, we're not going to give up our young shortstop. Minor leaguer Sal Stewart is one of the better prospects in our system, going to be in AAA this coming year after hitting 280 with 20 homers in AA. Alfredo Duno, pretty good catching prospect, although he's a long ways away at this point. Just played his first year in the DSL this past season. Don't love the low work ethic. Catcher ability above average, catcher arm pretty darn good, and he looks like he's got a little bit of power if he fully develops, but with that low work ethic, he's almost 20 years old. There's no guarantees that he reaches his potential. Errol Vera, who we picked up in the Rule 5 a year ago, had a respectable year for us, hitting 243 in 404 at-bats. Good personality, pretty versatile defensively. I don't think we want to add him into the deal. He's, a similar prospect to Jorge, but could have a role on our team. We're not going to get rid of our starting catcher. Clark Schmidt's penciled in as our number 5 starter right now, and he pitched really well last year finally for us as a starter, so we don't want to get rid of him, even though it was a small sample size. Will Warren, another guy probably going to be in our bullpen or competing for a 5th starter spot for us. Don't love giving him up. Justin Brule, although he was a Rule 5 pick a couple years ago, has been a pretty useful lefty arm out of our bullpen. And then Jared Kelnick was an MVP candidate 2 years ago, came back down to earth this year with a much more pedestrian season, but still is an important bat for us. I think I'm willing to include the minor league catcher Alfredo Duno. But I'll add Duno. But we're going to have to totally revisit it to... I don't want to pay any of Nola's salary if I'm going to include Duno. And I'd prefer not to have to take on JT Riddle at this point. I would just take any garbage prospect in the world who doesn't have a major league contract instead of Riddle. Josh Wintrobe is a 25-year-old who has never actually pitched for them. Minor league free agent signing just a couple of months ago. If we remove Riddle, I was going to see what they have to say. We've added in another legit player with Duno. We have taken the 5% that we were going to keep from Nola off the books, and we're avoiding taking on a bad contract, even though it's a small bad contract. So we'll submit that. And doesn't seem like he likes the offer. So I guess we're probably going to have to keep 5%, it seems. All right, so we've submitted that offer. Let's see what they have to say. And we're once again close to a deal that will get Nola's contract, at least 95% of Nola's contract off our books. It's definitely not costless. I think we'll be fine without Jorge, but but he's certainly not an unvaluable player as the number 43 prospect in baseball. Wolkow and Duno certainly have a chance of developing into something. But at least we've got Wintraub, who's only on a minor league contract, coming in return. The issue is we've got to add in another player. And they're not all useless players. I think the 26-year-old minor leaguer Tanner Cooper is the logical one to include. Feel like we are giving up a ton. You look at his 3-pitch arsenal, and he's certainly capable of pitching in the majors with his stuff. The issue is his movement is always going to be below average, and his control is still below average at this point. He's also 26 years old and hasn't made it above high A ball, although he did have a pretty respectable year there this past season. But an extreme fly ball pitcher who throws in the low 90s with below average movement is just not going to be successful for us in Cincinnati. I feel like I'm giving up a ton. And obviously, our signing of Nola a couple years ago has ended up blowing up on us. He had that elbow ligament reconstruction surgery, suffered the injury in spring training 2024 before he ever pitched for us, missed the entire year. He's come back and his injury proneness is still listed as normal, but he's a 32-year-old who had a very major injury. But his pitching ratings are just not at a level where they justify the amount of money that we're paying him. He's 13 and 14 with a 4.09 ERA, 2.4 WAR on the year. As I said, he was a respectable major league pitcher, but I don't think he's a $20 million pitcher anymore. And given, and this is a bit of a cop-out, but given that I know I'm not going to be playing this sim for many years into the future, makes me a little more likely to trade away a big-time prospect. I mean, when we first signed Nola, we thought his ratings, and his ratings probably were 60, 55, and 70, throwing in the low 90s, still throwing in the low 90s, but his stuff is 10 points worse. His movement is 10 points worse than when we signed him. His control is only 5 points worse than when we signed him. But I don't think he's magically going to start getting better at 32 and a half years old. And we are a team that's trying to win right now. We save a little bit of money if we get Nola off our books. And I think at this point, with Gallen for, we'll call it $6 million less than what we're paying Nola, with the fact that we do have to retain 5% of Nola's salary, we're as good a team, and we're arguably a better team with Gallen, who throws a little bit harder, as we talked about, his better stuff and movement, even though control isn't as good. He's got the 5-pitch arsenal, but admittedly, I would say that Nola's 5-pitch arsenal is more impressive. Nola's got that excellent stamina, only kind of okay at holding on runners. Gallen, not quite as good stamina, but still above average and a little below average in holding on runners. So they're similar pitchers. but I think we're going to make the trade. I can hear the groans from some of you. Should we try to get that 5% off the books, or should we just do this deal? I'm just going to do the deal. I can't risk this deal falling apart. And I don't really want to give up any of the other players that they liked besides Tanner Cooper, who I think has the lowest potential and is also one of the oldest. We're going to go ahead and complete the trade. Fans not pleased that Nola's gone. We knew that was going to happen. Our fan interest was at a 75, and it is now at a 69. So we dropped 6 points. We're below where we ended last season. But we've opened up some money so we can potentially try to bring Gallon on board now and then actually get our scouting and development budgets back to where they need to be. So step one in the off-season changes is done with Nola being gone. Player development, we're 7th. I believe we were 5th not that long ago, but we gave up the 43rd prospect in baseball, so the 3rd best prospect in our organization. Still have 5 top 100 prospects, including Minier, who should be helping us by the end of this coming season, and Sal Stewart, who conceivably could be also in September. So we still have a good farm system. Now we just need to make sure that we land Gallon for a reasonable price, or else this could really blow up on us. So we've simmed ahead a bit, and Gallon still hasn't even responded to our offer. So he's certainly playing hard to get with us a little bit, which is not a perfect situation for us, given that our ability to compete next year is still going to be reliant on having a big 3. And although we have Burns and Lodolo locked in as our 1 and 2 starters, Burns, who finished 2nd in the NL Cy Young Award voting this past season, 2025, and Lodolo, who finished 2nd in the NL Cy Young voting the year before, 2024, certainly would feel a lot better about the team if we're able to slot in a proven, solid major league starter like Zach Gallen in as our number 3. And I guess some slightly positive news. When the winter meetings began, Zach Gallen did tell us that we were in the lead with our offer to him, but nothing has officially happened yet. And we are now approaching the Rule 5 draft in a couple of days. We are also heavily scouting one final time all of the international amateur free agents. We've got one final camp to run in January before we have to start negotiating those deals and trying to convince some of those players to join our organization, hopefully bolster our minor league system a bit by bringing on some additional good international prospects. You can see we've got the 37th and 48th prospects in the game with 2 of the players that we've picked up in previous international amateur free agency forays. So if we can get Gallen wrapped up, I'll feel real good about where we are, and then we can start kind of hopefully getting our scouting and player development and draft budgets back to the level that they need to be. But right now we've got to prepare for the Rule 5 draft. There may be a player or 2 that we need to put onto our 40-man to avoid losing. Sal Stewart, who we've talked about, definitely going to want him on the 40-man. And we'll spend some time with some of these other guys with a little bit of potential. We've got some decent potential players there. Chase Petty, we're definitely going to want. He could definitely be in our rotation this coming year, so we're going to need to ensure that we protect him. There's no other obvious jump off the page names. Bryce Hubbard is pretty close. We just talked about him. He was requested in one of those trade offers. I don't think he's going to make the major league roster for us, but certainly with that profile, if we had to bring him up because of injuries, wouldn't feel bad about that. So we're going to put him on the 40-man also, and then I'll spend some time with the rest of these guys, make sure that there's no real big-time prospects that we could lose that I should protect. And we've made it to the Rule 5 draft. Now we did end up adding one additional player onto our 40-man roster, the catcher Cade Hunter. Looks like he could hit major league pitching. Don't love the fact that he's a little below average in terms of his catcher ability, but it also gives us 4 catchers on the 40-man, which is probably one too many. But with Hunter, Nelson, and Vellaheen all in their mid-20s, going to have a real good competition to see who's backing up Tyler Stevenson this year. And there's actually a couple of interesting prospects here in the Rule 5, even though we're not picking until 27th. You may remember JoJo Blackman. We actually picked him in the Rule 5 draft last year, and he ended up not making our team. They moved him up to high A ball this past year, where he hit .253 with 24 homers. Still like the captain personality, still like the range in the outfield, still like the speed. The bat, not all that exciting, but would consider bringing him into camp again. But I'm a little more intrigued by David Calabrese, another center fielder, 23 years old. Don't love the low work ethic, but more than acceptable range and error ratings for a backup center fielder. Has some decent speed. And on the batting side, our scout thinks he's got plus contact, plus gap power, plus eye. Just doesn't have a lot of home run power, okay at avoiding strikeouts. He's been in the majors. I mean, he hit just $188 in 16 at-bats, but he did hit .283 in AAA this past year, .293 in AA. I'm definitely intrigued by him. Right now, I think our outfield is kind of full with Hendricks starting in left, Kelnick in right, and then a battle between the youngster Jay Allen II and Kodama in center field, and then Benson is a backup corner outfield. But I think Calabrese could certainly compete with some of those guys for a spot on our team. Taking a look at the pitchers, don't know if there's anyone that jumps off the chart, given that our pitching staff is steadily getting better. Don't hate Jack Neely's profile. Plus stuff, plus movement. Don't love the lack of control, but not a horrible guy to bring into camp potentially. Let's see what our scouting director recommends. He recommends we don't do anything. I'm going to bring Calabrese into camp at least. We're going to go ahead and draft him, move on to the second round and see who's still out there. Assume the scouting director still recommends we don't do anything. But I'm going to investigate a few other players before deciding one way or another that we're done or not. And I'm actually going to go with another center fielder here in the second round, and it's not JoJo Blackman. It's Benny Montgomery. Solid glove, like the speed, like the work ethic. The bat is balanced, but honestly, and the bat's not great, but could have plus gap power and plus home run power. With good speed, that gap power is not the worst combination. Hit 20 homers across A ball and AA ball last year. I don't think he's a great prospect, but I think he's worth bringing into camp. And if we have some injuries, he gives us some versatility. I like the fact that he's got the high work ethic, unlike the other center fielder we're bringing in. And, he's 60 or above in all of these categories. He certainly could be a competent fifth outfielder with this profile. The question is whether the Reds are too loaded for him to make the roster, but I'm willing to draft him and bring him into spring training and find out. And here in the third round, scouting director, of course, continues to say that we shouldn't pick anybody, but Jack Neely is still out there. I don't know that he makes our 26-man roster, but he's got pretty good stuff, decent movement. His control's a little below average, but he's had mid-3 ERAs the last 2 years in Double-A. Struck out well over a batter an inning both years. Like I said, as a 25-year-old, he's not the greatest prospect in the world, but am I willing to bring him into camp and see what he can do in spring training? Absolutely. And it looks like when all was said and done, there were 10 players picked in the draft. We picked in 3 rounds. The Angels actually picked 5 different players, and then the Red Sox and Yankees each picked 1 player. At this point, as we get closer to the new year, we've now got 39 players on our 40-man roster with the 3 that we picked up in the Rule 5, as well as I believe it was 4 players that we had to put on our 40-man roster to protect them from the Rule 5. So we've got 1 40-man roster spot left at this point. And we've got 1 pitcher that we've made a big free agent offer to that we would love to bring on board to fill that final spot on our 40-man roster. Hopefully we can hear from Gallen over the next week or so, and he can be a nice holiday surprise for our fans. And we got an interesting offer from the Mariners here as we head towards the New Year's Eve. They offered us Pedro Leon, who's a decent outfielder, pretty versatile defensively, has some good speed, can even play some positions in the infield, and a bat that's not horrible, but not great. And all they wanted in return was Will Benson, who's our 5th outfielder most likely. I think that we would certainly do that straight up. But then they also wanted a minor league reliever, Jose Acuna. Really good stuff. Had a 3.87 ERA in Double-A this year after we promoted him from high A ball. Not a big-time prospect, but a decent relief pitcher. But then they also want us to give them over $28 million in cash. So that is, I think, a bit of a testament to the financials of a lot of teams not being in good shape. They're only minus $14 million at this point almost. So we could certainly help get them out of their negative hole, but it is a little bit disconcerting to see so many teams struggling financially just a couple years, just 3 seasons into the playthrough. I've heard anecdotally through comments from viewers of my videos and then also either on the OOTP message board, Reddit, that there's concern about the financials among some people who have simulated further into the future, and certainly here 3 years in where there's a bunch of teams with huge negative balances does make me hope that the latest patch that the folks at OOTP are working on this week solves some of these issues so we can finish up with the Reds, as much fun as I'm having playing with them, and move on to our long-term OOTP 24 playthrough, which hopefully we'll be able to get started sometime in the next few weeks. And it is a happy new year for Cincinnati here on January 2nd. Zach Gallen finally inked that deal to join the team. So that definitely fills out our pitching staff, fills out our 40-man roster also, as I talked about. I'm looking at Seattle. I'm wondering why things did not look familiar. Still looking at them, but now we will get Gallon onto the active roster and onto the 40-man, and he'll definitely fill the hole from the departure of Nola, and he will fill it in a more cost-effective way. As I talked about, haven't talked about in this episode, specifically about Huascar Noah, but unlikely that he will be our fourth starter this coming season. I think the first opportunity to become the fourth starter is going to go to Chase Petty, who will certainly be with us in camp, and see what kind of distance we can get out of him with his 40 stamina. But would love to see what he can do for us. He had a nice year last year, split between AA and AAA, 10-6 overall, with an ERA just over 3 combined between the two levels. 4.4 WAR across the two levels. Doesn't really have anything else left to prove in the minors. So I feel with top 3 of Burns, Lodolo, and Gallon pretty well established. Schmidt did an excellent job for us in a limited sample size as our number 5 starter last year, but clearly he's had ups and downs over his career with us. So having guys like Inoa around, Andre Palante, who we traded for earlier this offseason, Max Meyer, Will Warren, even Rever San Martin and Aaron Savale could all start for us at the back end of rotation if needed. So we've got a lot of depth on the pitching staff right now where I think ultimately we'll be able to find productive 4th and 5th starters. But sitting here on January 2nd, my first thought is that we're going to give Petty the shot as our 4th starter and Schmidt the start as our 5th starter, barring something strange happening during spring training. And with Gallon now signed and our 40-man roster full, we can start getting our scouting and development budgets back up to a respectable level thanks to getting some of that money from NOLA off of the books. Our draft budget, we're actually not too far off there. And we've got more set aside in international amateur free agency than we're going to be allowed to spend this year. And we've still got over $15 million, so we can actually, kind of get towards the levels that we've been at the last couple years, and we can actually go $1 million above where we were a year ago in terms of scouting and player development. And we've still got a little bit of money to spend if there's a free agent who lingers on the market, or if there is a trade that we want to make during the season to take on some salary. We didn't lower our ticket prices. I felt like after a team that's gone to the playoffs 2 straight years, just won 89 games, although our fan interest is in a very mediocre range, hopefully we can continue to get some fans in the seats, particularly if we get off to a good start. Hopefully that will generate some fan interest organically, because it is a little bit disappointing that I feel like we've made some decent progress with this team over the years, and the financial profile isn't really as strong as I think it probably should be, given what we've been able to do. But it is what it is. I'm not going to complain. And here on January 5th, we've scouted the whole universe of international amateur free agents again. So our scout is free for general duties with the draft or the signing period only 10 days away. Certainly not going to try to scout everyone for another time. But we are going to run all of the guys that we've ran through our 3 previous camps through one final time, hopefully get our scouting accuracy up to a high level on all of them and maybe even very high on a few. Got some real strong relationships, which is going to be important because we're obviously looking at some of the marquee players where league interest is really high. So we'll run that final practice, and we're now high accuracy on all of them, strong or very strong relationships with all of them. So I think we're in as decent a position as we possibly could be as we get ready for the beginning of the international amateur free agency period in just a week and a half. And I don't normally check in on the Hall of Fame voting results because I think that part of the engine is not necessarily the strongest. And unfortunately, I think the results this year kind of indicate that because Ichiro was not even voted in his second year on the ballot. Beltran, Beltre, A-Rod, and Sabathia also not getting in. So nobody elected this year to the Hall of Fame. But our attention turns to the international amateur free agent signing period. And as I mentioned, two of our top prospects are guys that we picked up in international amateur free agency. Carabajo was our number one signing last year, and we ended up getting him for $3.75 million. While the year before we picked up Jorge Guerrero, and we were able to pick him up for just $1.75 million. So I like the changes to international amateur free agency. I know those of you who have watched previous episodes have probably heard me say the same thing, but my approach, admittedly in a small sample size and admittedly something that's still evolving here just a month or so into OOTP 24, but typically my approach has been to try to bring on one big player, but not for 4.75, $5.25, $5.7 million. Try to bring on a big player who's a little bit of a bargain, leave myself some money to pick up some supplemental players and try to come out of international amateur free agency with 3 or 4, maybe even 5 players, including at least 1, if not 2, that I really like. Now, whether I'll be able to execute on that, who knows? But we'll see where this international amateur free agency takes us this year. This is actually weird that our scouting accuracy is all of a sudden low on everybody, when I know that we've brought a bunch of these guys through our camps. And we've scouted everybody 3 times. I mean, I know sometimes that just doesn't... The scouting is very ineffective for these players. I've scouted the entire universe 3 times, and you can see that I don't have more than low scouting accuracy on anybody. Wait, I gotta have this messed up. Okay. Somehow it got moved to the OOTP Scouting Association. It was very confusing to me. All right, we do have high scouting accuracy on the people that Michael Hill has been scouting for us intently. And you can see that although we're still low on a lot of people, we've gotten to average on a fair amount of the prospects also. So I'm going to spend a bit of time offline coming up with a strategy, looking at where our relationships are good, how much the players are demanding, and likely put out offers to probably 2 key players with the hopes that at least one of them will ultimately sign for less than the maximum, which will give us the opportunity to hopefully shift on the fly after we get one of those players signed and then add some other decent talent to our team before the top few dozen prospects are all gone. All right, we've come up with what I think is a pretty aggressive plan here. I can't imagine we're going to be able to sign both of these players that we're going to go after. But I think it's a plan that in the worst case scenario, we come out with one player that we really like, as well as a good amount of money to rebound with when the second player rejects us. The guy that I think we can definitely sign is Arturo Leyva, second baseman. We've got a strong relationship with him. League interest in him is supposedly pretty low. We've got high scouting accuracy. And the contact, gap power, and eye are all excellent. The home run power is very, very good. He's going to strike out a decent amount, but with that potential bat, I don't care about the fact that he really doesn't have a position to play. He's a first baseman or a DH. Doesn't have great stealing or base running instincts. Speed is only average, but he does have a high work ethic. And the fact that there's not a lot of interest in him makes me want to give him an offer a bit more than his demand and just see if we can get him locked up. He says he really likes our organization, would love to come play with us. We're going to offer him 1.55 million. Actually make it 1.58 and see if maybe we can get him locked up immediately as our first big player. Would love to have Superfly on board. And then with the balance of money we have left, we're going to get into what I'm sure will be a crazy bidding war. But the 16-year-old starting pitching prospect, David Leyva, is durable, excellent stamina, really good at holding runners, potentially has a 5-pitch arsenal, even if the changeup doesn't develop, a good 4-pitch arsenal. Stuff above average, and his movement and control both excellent. Just think he is a potentially great pitching prospect. Our relationship with him is very strong. Unfortunately, league interest is also very high. So I tend to think he's going to end up going for the max. But we're going to come in strong right now. We can offer up to 3.687 million. We're going to offer him 3.25 million right now. So pretty significantly above what he's looking for, and see if maybe we can just lock him up right away. I tend to think he's going to end up going for $4.5, $5.5 million, in which case we'll probably drop out and turn our focus back to the second baseman. But we're going to at least get offers out to these two potentially big-time prospects in the early stages. So Leyva among the pitchers, and Leyva, oh, that's interesting. Leyva and Leyva, spelled differently. Maybe it's meant to be that we get the Leyva brothers both signed this off season. As I said, I think getting David Leyva is going to be unlikely just with that league interest so high. I think his price is going to end up being off the charts. But if we can get Arturo Leyva signed relatively quickly, that'll leave us with a decent amount of money to bounce back and maybe throw at some of these other decent prospects, assuming that things with David Leyva fall apart in an expeditious manner. The worst thing would be if we don't find out that we're not going to get David Leyva for an extended period of time and we've got money locked up in him that we can't use on somebody else for a while. But we'll see what happens. I think we're being pretty aggressive, but if we can get one of these guys, I'll feel good. And if I can somehow get both of these guys, I would feel great. So both of the Leyvas said that they liked our initial offers. Somewhat surprisingly, the guy that I felt stronger about, Arturo Leyva, has already come back and told me he's looking for more money. We can definitely make an enhanced offer to him. although not at this point. He's looking for 2.8 million from the Orioles. So we can't get to that point with him, unfortunately. The most that we can offer right now is 1.98 million, which is more than we had offered him before. But I have a feeling he's going to be insulted by that. Yeah, he is looking for 2.7 million. As much as I like him, I want to see what happens with David Leyva. And if David Leyva comes back looking for huge money, then we'll pivot right back to Arturo. Hopefully, it'll be a few days before he signs. And I'm not going to lie, that went the exact opposite way than I expected. David Leyva signed with us without further negotiation. So I love him as a pitching prospect. I really didn't think there was any way we were going to get him with that $3.25 million offer, given that he was in such demand throughout the league. But we came in well above what he was initially looking for. And pitching prospects from international amateur free agency tend to be a difficult prospect to get them developed to the potential that you think they have. But a guy who's got a potential 5-pitch arsenal, potential great stamina, durable, and we think could have plus stuff, movement, and control. Very happy to bring a prospect like him on board for $3.25 million. And now that gives us the opportunity to pivot to some other players. Leyva, Arturo is not going to be among them because at this point we've got 1.98 million available, but we'll take a couple more shots and see if we can bring on a big partner for Daniel Leyva. Rogelio Carrillo is another one of the top prospects. I have a feeling, although it says he's looking for 1.9 million, I have a feeling at this point, about a week into international amateur free agency, that he's already going to have been offered more than the 1.98 million that we can give. But might as well check in. Who? He says he's only looking for 1.38 million. Whew. I really like the bat, like the speed, like the work ethic. The glove is not perfect for a center fielder. It's a really darn good right fielder. Would love to have a higher error rating in center, and obviously would love to be in the 70s in terms of his range. But he can be a good defensive outfielder to a great defensive outfielder at any position with a real interesting bat. I have a feeling it's going to be a guy that ends up being a big bidding war, but we're going to shoot our shot with him. He says he's only looking for 1.38 million. We've got 1.98 that we can offer, which would max us out completely. We're going to just shoot our big shot and see if we can bring in 2 5-star prospects in international amateur free agency this year, hopefully coming in over $600,000 more than he's looking for. We'll just convince him to sign with us right away. Clearly, if he comes back and says that he wants more money, we've got to move on to somebody else. But I guess we're trying to go big this year. And not surprisingly, although Carrillo said he really liked our offer yesterday, today he comes back and says that he's looking for more money. 3.2 million, not an amount that we could pay. So we'll have to move on to a less incredible prospect than Mr. Carrillo, unfortunately. And we're going to go back to a second pitcher. And those of you who have been watching me for years are going to be surprised by the guy that we're going to go for. But we're going to make an offer to Juan Ramos, who's got an awful personality with low leadership, loyalty, and work ethic. It's kind of a hope trade that our coaching staff will be able to maximize his ability, but does potentially have a 4-pitch arsenal, although it could very well be a 3-pitch arsenal. But he's got durability and could have plus stuff, movement, and control. We've got just enough money to make him an offer. He says he's looking for $1.9 million. So we're going to go ahead and at least get that offer out there. I do have a potential fallback if it doesn't work. It's a guy that we've been kind of whining and dining throughout as a fallback. You may remember from a previous episode, Juan Ardone is a guy that was not as impressive of a prospect, but that we've built a very strong relationship with, even though league interest is very low. Kind of a average-ish bat, a little bit above average in terms of his catcher ability, but think we can probably bring him on board for a pretty reasonable amount. Yeah, he says he'd come for $800,000. So if the deal falls through with Juan Ramos, who's obviously a feast or famine prospect with that type of personality, I'd say it's probably a 20% chance that he works out and becomes a good major league pitcher, probably an 80% chance that he just flounders in the minors and never becomes anything. But with the ceiling that we think he could have, willing to take a shot there on a player with more potential upside. And we made it to the start of the preseason. No change to our budget from owner Robert Castellini. So a little disappointed that after an 89-win season and a very profitable year for him that our budget was cut by $2 million for this season. But with the departure of Nolan, bringing on Gallen, we kind of made it work financially. Arturo Leyva, the Leyva that we thought we were going to get signed, ended up going with Pittsburgh. And he ended up signing for $4.815 million, so he got every penny out of it. Really love his bat, but love Daniel Leyva that we were able to bring on board. Preseason is underway. We are still waiting to find out more about what's going on with international amateur free agency. Ramos allegedly favors our offer, so there is still potential that we'll bring him on board aside Leyva. So we're still waiting to see what happens with him. Obviously, Gallen is our big acquisition of this offseason. And the Reds have a full 40-man roster, so take a quick look at who's available. A guy like Yency Almonte would not be a bad pitcher to add for our bullpen, but we'd basically have to spend every penny that we have left to sign him to a 1-year contract, so I don't know that that would be the route to take. Taking a look at the batters, Christian Vasquez still out there. We don't really need a catcher. Cody Bellinger, Bo Bichette, Nico Horner, Eric Hosmer, Eloy Jimenez, Max Kepler, some interesting names out there. There is a chance, I guess, that somebody becomes interesting over the next month and a half as we get closer to the start of spring training and even into spring training. You know, maybe there's an opportunity to bring on some additional talent to our team. I do feel right now with the fact that see that we've got 15 pretty decent pitchers on our pitching staff right now. The most we're going to be going with is 13. So we could certainly look to trade away a pitcher or two to open up some additional salary space. That's something that we can potentially do as we get closer to spring training. It's very conceivable that a guy like Aaron Savale isn't going to end up on our team making $1.75 million. Shop him around and there are options there. There is a minor league guy who's not making anything, but he's a 35-year-old with poor control. So we're not really going to save any money by potentially trading away Savali. It doesn't look like in most cases, but there might be some options there for us to bring on someone at a position that would be more useful for us. So we've got a lot to think about as the preseason begins and we head into spring training and try to get the Reds up north for the start of the season in complete health and with the strongest roster possible. And we'll see how we do in achieving those goals in our next episode. Until then, thanks so much for watching and hope you have a great day.